I have a surprise for you.
In Despair Town, every night, terrifying demons roam the streets. They kill the residents at will. But for many, it becomes a form of relief, because in the town, strange occurrences are everywhere, and the residents seem forever trapped here. At the end of the second season, suddenly, many strange changes occurred in the town. First, a storm hits, and most of the town's vegetables are destroyed. Next is Tima, who was long diagnosed as infertile, unexpectedly became pregnant. The most miraculous is Besa, who passes through a hole in the woods, and was transported to a tower. There, she met a mysterious boy, who seems to know the way to leave, but before Besa can ask, the boy pushes her off the ledge. When she wakes up again, she finds herself in a hospital. Besa has actually left Despair Town, and she arrived at a hospital in Maine, although it seems she has gained her freedom. But the town's oddball, Victor, once said,
"Things change. Here it's usually bad."
Besa is unsure why she has ended up here, but her years of living in Despair Town lead her to decide to leave this place first. So, while the doctor is conducting an examination, Besa evades the guards and escapes the hospital. She looks at the bustling scene on the street and feels very out of place. She doesn't even know what to do. At this moment, Besa seems to see the boy who pushed her down before. She hurriedly chases after him, but he disappears in an instant. This makes Besa even more alert, fearing that this is just a larger Despair Town. Filled with confusion, Besa doesn't know what to do. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Sheriff Boyd is pondering how to deal with the damage caused by the storm. Over half of the town's vegetables have been destroyed, and if not handled properly, there could be a food crisis. Just as he is thinking, a boy approaches him. His name is Ethan, and he is Besa's son. He came to find the sheriff this time precisely because of the disappearance of Besa. Although Boyd wants to help him, but he truly has no way to do so. At that time, Besa went into the jungle to rescue her daughter Julie, and ultimately disappeared into a tree hole. This clearly falls under the category of strange occurrences, and all Boyd can do is to advise Ethan to let it go. However, Ethan's father Jim disagrees with this view. Seeing that the sheriff is unwilling to help, Jim prepares to go into the woods alone. He packs his bags and gets ready to enter the jungle. Boyd immediately intervenes upon seeing this. He has been in there before, and Boyd is very aware of the dangers inside. He doesn't want Jim to die, but Jim ignored all this advice, not caring at all. Seeing this situation, Deputy Kenny decided to accompany Jim into the jungle to prevent any accidents. Seeing he cannot persuade Jim, he can only share his experience of entering the jungle with both of them, especially how to avoid monsters at night, and then allows them to leave. However, before they set off, an unexpected incident occurs. The glass of a nearby house suddenly explodes. Boyd rushes over to check it out, and finds that it was caused by the genius Jack. Jack, who had previously encountered a humanoid monster, had discovered some mysterious patterns. Jack believes there is some deep meaning behind them, so he used rope at home to reconstruct a model. But to this day, Jack still has made no discoveries. Not only that, perhaps the immense pressure has caused Jack to become somewhat unstable. The previous explosion was a result of this. Boyd immediately took Jack back to the police station, temporarily separating him from the model, prevent further situations from happening. But one wave did not calm down, and another rose again. Just solved Jack's situation. Boyd learned from Donna that the remaining vegetables in the fields, due to improper storage, surprisingly, almost all of it has rotted. As a result, this meant that the town's food reserves would be severely insufficient. Boyd immediately gathered experienced residents to discuss how to resolve this issue. Deputy Kenny's mother suggested planting some crops with shorter growth cycles first. At the same time, in other areas, plant some normal food. Try to shorten the famine period as much as possible. Although a good plan, the shortest time to maturity would still take at least 3 months. Given the current situation, the residents could last at most 1 month. Just as Boyd was pondering, the news had reached the townspeople. Upon hearing there would be a famine, people immediately began hoarding food. The place with the most food in town was Kenny's mother's restaurant. Many residents gathered outside, and soon a riot broke out. The restaurant was almost completely emptied, and some people even turned their attention to the farm animals. David was the first to forcibly drag a sheep away. Seeing the trend of others effectively imitating, the oddball Victor stepped forward to stop them. A bloody incident was imminent, but fortunately, Boyd arrived just in time and managed to defuse the situation. David reluctantly returned the animal, but this was only the prelude to disaster, because that night, the humanoid monsters seemed to be aware of the residents' situation. The monsters directly opened the farm's fence, releasing all the cows and sheep. Boyd and the others saw the animals outside, and immediately realized that it was bad. He couldn't care about the monsters, and rushed out of the house. He rushed to save the animal, and this was exactly what the monsters wanted. Before long, several humanoid monsters surrounded him, and, in front of the residents, brutally killed a cow. David, who lives in a bus, witnessing this situation, he turns on the headlights, and honks the horn to attract attention. Strive for escape opportunities for others. They pull some of the animals back into the house. Although there were significant losses, they managed to save some. However, Boyd's situation is dire, as he and Kenny's mother flee with the animals into a barn. Boyd was just about to breathe a sigh of relief. He found himself in the shadow behind him. Several humanoid monsters emerged. Obviously, they have been ambushing here for a long time. Before Boyd can react, a few monsters controlled him. Then he was tied to a pillar. In his eyes, filled with despair and pain, the monsters devour Kenny's mother. Strangely, the monsters do not harm Boyd. It is precisely this doubt that this leads to doubts about Boyd among the townspeople. On Jim's side, during the day, Jim and Deputy Kenny venture deep into the jungle. He is completely unaware of the happenings in the town. Following the information provided by Boyd, they quickly find a cabin where they can spend the night. However, strangely, there are some things here that Boyd had never mentioned before. For example, there are some rather frightening statues, and outside the cabin, there are many fresh vegetables. Although they do not know what has happened, but it's always right to stock up on more food. The two spend the night in the cabin. Meanwhile, Besa, in her confusion, follows her heart to a church. She wants to seek guidance from a pastor, but she learned about it because of this. She had been missing for over 10 months. During this time, many newspapers have reported on her, and the police have been searching for her, but there was never any harvest. Clearly, the flow of time in Despair Town is different from the outside world. Besa wants to tell the pastor about her strange experiences, but fears being considered insane and locked in a mental hospital. In the end, Besa can only leave the church, but before she goes, the pastor tells Besa he can think about what her wants to do, so she won't feel confused. Upon hearing this, Besa suddenly remembers her that before entering the tree hole, Victor had given her a box. Now that entered the outside world, this may be the guidance of fate. Inside the box, there is indeed a note, which has Victor's address written on it. Besa follows the information on it, and coincidentally encounters an old man returning. This man is Victor's father. He notices the iron box at first glance, and asks Besa where she found it. After all, in the old man's world, his son Victor has been missing for decades. Besa tells the old man that the box was given to her by Victor. Upon hearing this news, the old man immediately invited Besa inside to explain in detail. He then learned that there is indeed a place called Despair Town, and that Victor has been trapped there for decades. Just when Besa thought he believed her, she noticed that the old man picked up the phone, reporting to the police that there was a lunatic in his house. Besa explained to the old man that everything she said was true, and cited various examples, including the news about her disappearance. The old man didn't believe her at all, until Besa mentioned that she returned here through the tower. The old man's expression suddenly turned serious. Just then, the police arrived. The old man went to open the door, and sent the officers away. Upon careful inquiry, he learned that the old man's wife had also experienced hallucinations. One of the scenes is the tall tower. Moreover, she had left behind many paintings of scenes. The old man said this as he led Besa to the basement, where there were indeed many paintings stored, most of which depicted scenes similar to those in Despair Town. According to the old man, when Victor was 6 years old, his wife, she suddenly began to see hallucinations, and heard the cries of children in distress. His wife insisted that she was the chosen one, and that her duty was to save those children in need. Since then, his wife is like crazy. She began to study the content of illusions. Besa listened to the old man's narration. She couldn't help but think her experiences were similar to those of the old man's wife. So could it mean that Besa's responsibility was also to rescue those children? Meanwhile, in Despair Town, the residents finally endured through the night. They immediately began to assess the damages. Jack arrived at the barn. He found Boyd tied to a pillar, as well as Kenny's mother lying nearby. Jack immediately understood what had happened last night. He quickly untied the ropes. Boyd's first moment of liberation. He ran to the bodies and cried out. Boyd loathed his own helplessness. Just then, some residents have raised doubts. Same also trapped in the barn. Why is the sheriff safe and sound? Their tone was filled with suspicion. Boyd knew. Those people don't believe in themselves. He is well aware that this was the monster's goal, to sow discord among them, leading them to kill each other in suspicion. This is the scene that the monsters enjoy the most. Yet the truth is right in front of them. Boyd cannot defend himself. Even Donna from the communal house begins to blame Boyd. After all, these events were all caused by him. If Boyd hadn't led the way out last night, although many livestock would have been lost, but Kenny's mother would not have died as a result. The accusations made Boyd realize that the town was gradually spiraling out of control. He must do something, or the town would soon face disaster. Just then, Jim and his companion returned from searching the jungle. They bringing back a lot of fresh vegetables, enough for everyone to eat for a period of time. This should have been a happy event, but Kenny noticed that everyone looked sorrowful. Through inquiry, they learned about what happened last night. Kenny refused to believe it at all, and hurried back to the restaurant to look for that familiar figure, but he found nothing, and his heart was filled with anguish. Kenny vowed to take revenge on those monsters, but at that moment, the unpowered radio suddenly began to play music. The cheerful lyrics inside seemed like a provocation and mockery from the monsters. In his rage, Kenny smashed the radio. At this moment, Kenny was completely consumed by anger. He went to the warehouse, pouring the stored gasoline into bottles. He is obviously making incendiary bombs. Kenny is preparing to battle the monsters. Fortunately, Boyd noticed in time, and was able to stop him from doing something foolish. As Boyd said, those monsters are truly cunning and powerful, and one must be cautious in dealing with them. Acting impulsively like this would only lead to falling into the traps set by the monsters in advance. What truly stopped Kenny was actually his mother's dying words. Kenny listened to Boyd's awkward Cantonese, and he broke down in tears on the spot. Kenny decided to live well, so that his mother would no longer worry. Not long after, the townspeople held a funeral for Kenny's mother. At the funeral, everyone displayed a sense of grief and anger, with Sheriff Boyd being the most prominent. He told everyone that he would make the monsters pay. After the funeral, Boyd told his son Eric that he wanted to capture a monster again, to study its structure carefully. Eric was the first to object, saying they had previously captured such a monster, but gained nothing from it, which caused considerable damage instead. Boyd did not gain his son's support, and he fell into deep thought. However, what they did not know was that Eric's wife, Tima, was also experiencing something unusual. Normally, women may experience peculiar taste symptoms during pregnancy, but Tima's case was particularly strange. She looked at those rotten vegetables and drooled. Tima often steals food, and she seemed to enjoy it immensely. In addition, there was another strange incident in the town. After Jim returned home, a phone suddenly rang. There is no phone line at all. After hesitating, Jim decided to take it up. Surprisingly, the voice of his deceased son Thomas could be heard inside. Jim couldn't believe it, but in Despair Town, anything could happen, and it wasn't surprising. He prepared to ask Thomas how he was, but on the other end, a voice suddenly said, "Two siblings outside are in danger." Jim dropped the phone and went to look for Julie and Ethan, who were playing in the pasture. They had no idea what was happening, but were taken home by their father, Jim. This made them angry, and Jim was very frustrated. He was trying to keep the kids safe, yet he was met with such complaints. Two children saw this situation. They quickly ran outside to avoid Jim seeing them leave. He was about to go and chase them back immediately, but was interrupted by the ringing phone again. Jim hesitated for a moment, but ultimately decided to hang up. Previously, he had missed his children too much, but looking back now, it was likely a trick by the monsters. Meanwhile, strange occurrences were happening throughout the entire town, because Kenny and the others had found a large amount of vegetables. Some residents went to pick them together. However, during this time, Jack had an abnormality. He looked around during his free time picking. Jack and suddenly saw in the distance two stones covered in blood, and next to them, in a tree, was a figure nailed to it. Jack cautiously approached to take a look, but unexpectedly, the figure suddenly moved and grabbed his clothes, as if wanting Jack to take its place. At that critical moment, a shout came. Jack just realized that he actually stayed in place all the time, and that the scenes he had seen were merely his hallucinations. Jack deeply felt that this place was full of weird. He immediately prepared to leave. Dr. Klee hurried after him, wanting to ask Jack what had happened. Unfortunately, the doctor triggered a trap buried deep in the snow, and blood stained the surrounding snow red. Kenny and the others heard Klee's cries, and quickly rushed over to check. They found that the trap was connected by chains, but the trap had not been maintained for a long time, and the lock hole was damaged. They could only try to force it open with sticks, but the wooden sticks were not strong enough, and they not only failed, but instead worsened Klee's injuries. At that moment, Jack suddenly remembered. Over there at the wooden house, there are many strange sculptures. The brackets of those things are made of iron, so can definitely open the trap. Therefore, they dismantled one of the sculptures, and used its frame to rescue Klee. I just don't know if it's related to the demolition of the statue. Jack suddenly saw the mysterious man nailed to the tree surprisingly appeared not far away. He was holding a skull in his hand, and invited Jack to share in the blood inside. Fortunately, the hallucination only lasted a moment before disappearing, although he was filled with doubts, but Jack did not tell anyone about it. The scene shifts to Tima's side. As a pregnant woman, she received preferential treatment and resources, and her food was prioritized every day. But seeing these ordinary ingredients, she had no appetite whatsoever, but instead felt extremely nauseous. Taking advantage of everyone's distraction, she snuck out again, and Tima picked up the rotten vegetables to eat. But this time, an old woman passed by, and Tima realized her secret was exposed. She dropped the vegetables, and fled back inside. What she didn't expect was that the old woman actually chased after her. Just when Tima didn't know how to explain herself, the old woman said that having strange cravings during pregnancy is very normal. She comforted Tima, telling her not to worry. However, Tima knew very well that it wasn't just her strange cravings, that her baby might also be abnormal. After all, she had long been diagnosed as infertile. But the old woman said that it's normal for pregnant women to be emotionally sensitive, and that she shouldn't overthink it. Drawing from her own experience, the old woman recounted that during her pregnancy, she had 3 weeks. She muttered to herself inexplicably into the air, but then it suddenly disappeared. So she believed it was a similar situation now. If Tima was still worried, she could offer her some help. Therefore, the old woman, seeing Tima's puzzled expression, went back to her place, and took out a deck of tarot cards from a drawer. To avoid waking the sleeping Elgin, she deliberately slowed down her movements. According to the old woman, the tarot cards could reveal the insights nature provided, and they would surely help Tima open her heart. As the old woman finished drawing the cards, just as she picked one up to interpret, an unexpected event occurred again. After this incident, the two of them also forgot about the tarot cards, but Victor never let go. He believed that the recent series of strange events must be a sign of impending doom. After all, since the first season, there had been rumors of a great disaster. Victor planned to take the initiative, and he took a shovel with him. Victor went to a certain location marked on the map. He dug up a suitcase from underground, the same one he had buried in the first season. It's unclear what Victor plans to do now that he has dug it up. In addition, Sheriff Boyd was also not idle. Since his son Eric didn't support him, he decided to act alone. Following his own plan, he lured a humanoid monster into a building, and trapped it inside. As long as he could wait until dawn, the creature would be at his mercy. But the plan was very risky, so he had to prepare carefully. Boyd found David, and asked him to temporarily stay in the bus. After all, it was the best observation point, where they could closely observe the monster's habits. However, when he saw David, he found David standing there in a daze. David seemed to be trapped in a fantasy world, and it wasn't until Boyd called out to him that David snapped back to reality. Through their conversation, David suddenly saw bees flying into the bus, and their numbers kept increasing. Just as he was surrounded by the bees, Boyd's voice pulled him back to reality. Upon hearing that the sheriff was only there to observe the monster, David immediately agreed to help. Little did he know that this decision nearly cost him his life. The perspective shifts to Basha. After spending time with Victor's father, she gathered a lot of information about the town. In particular, she learned that, in Victor's backyard, there was a tree covered in glass bottles, which looked just like one in the town. Perhaps there was some connection between the two, but Victor's father said that this was actually made by his wife, as a replica of a tree in a nearby park. This made Basha think of the 2 trees in the town that were also covered in glass bottles. She quickly asked to go and take a look. However, halfway there, Basha suddenly said. She didn't want to go anymore, and she broke down in tears. It turned out that just moments ago, Basha found the bracelet she had given to her husband on Victor's father's car, recalling earlier when the bracelet had inexplicably appeared in the restaurant, and the music playing in the car, which happened to be the same song frequently played in the town. Basha instinctively concluded that this was another larger despair town. If that was the case, then what was the point of trying? She immediately decided to get out and leave, but Victor's father, worried about his son, wasn't about to give up. While trying to persuade Basha, he continued driving toward the park. The two of them were struck by a speeding car. When Basha regained consciousness, she found herself in an ambulance. Basha only had minor scrapes, but Victor's father remained unconscious beside her. What worried Basha the most was that there was a female police officer in the ambulance. She happened to be here to search for her. Basha was very worried about going back to the hospital again. Just as she was thinking about how to escape, the ambulance suddenly came to a halt. It turned out that not far away, a fallen tree was blocking the road. Seeing this scene, Basha immediately remembered that at the very beginning, it was this tree that had brought her family into Despair Town. Was history about to repeat itself? Because the road was blocked, the ambulance could only take a detour. As night fell over the land, they still hadn't found the way to the hospital. At this moment, Basha completely accepted this cruel reality. She told the people in the ambulance that there was a small town not far away. They could stay there for the night, and the townspeople were very friendly. Everyone, hearing this, followed her directions and moved ahead. Before long, they indeed saw a small town. But just then, the driver of the ambulance suddenly noticed that someone was lying on the ground not far away. Out of professional duty, he stopped the vehicle, and the medical staff decided to go check it out. At this moment, Basha's face changed drastically, and she kept trying to stop them from getting out of the car, but they didn't listen to her warnings at all. The two medical staff still got out to investigate, and, as expected, they were killed on the spot. The female police officer saw this situation, and immediately drew her gun to shoot at the monsters. But this kind of weapon couldn't harm the monsters. The group of monsters smiled as they approached the officer, and realizing something was wrong, the officer turned and ran. She disregarded Basha, who was in the ambulance, as she was currently locked in handcuffs. Basha couldn't escape even if she wanted to. At this moment, Jim's family suddenly burst out of the house, calling out for his wife. Sheriff Boyd, guarding the bus, quickly ushered them back inside. However, they said that Basha was in the ambulance over there. It turned out that not long ago, the phone in the house rang eerily again, but this time it was Ethan who answered. The person on the other end still claimed to be Thomas, and this time he told Ethan that their mother Basha would soon be returning to the town by ambulance, and that there would be danger when she arrived, and that they needed to rush out to meet her. After Jim heard this, he initially thought it was just a monster trick, until just now, when he was startled awake by the sound of gunfire. He realized that an ambulance had entered the town at some point. Putting together the earlier phone call, he realized that something was wrong. Hearing what Jim said, Sheriff Boyd also decided to believe them. They went out together to search, and they found Basha trapped, but they didn't have the key to the handcuffs, so they had to use some tools. The nearest toolbox to them was on David's bus. Therefore, David had to return to the bus, and he finally got the toolbox. David found that he was surrounded by the monsters. Though he was nervous, he remained calm, because David had a talisman in his hand, which could effectively repel the group of monsters. But at this moment, he fell into a hallucination again. David saw countless bees swarming towards him. He could only use his final moments of clarity to throw the toolbox to Boyd and the others. Then David fell to the ground in pain. However, strangely, the monsters only surrounded David, and didn't kill him. Boyd prepared to drive the ambulance to rescue him, but he couldn't find the keys no matter what. At this moment, a monster handed over the ambulance keys, but the price was leaving David behind. Watching his companion in the distance, Boyd hesitated for a moment, and then snatched the keys from the monster's hand. Boyd abandoned David. David just regained consciousness at this moment, and he saw Boyd abandoning him. David could only curse at him, and then he was devoured by the monsters. Meanwhile, the female police officer ran desperately towards the communal house, shooting at the monsters as she went, but she was so panicked that she accidentally shot a resident. Watching from the window, Dr. Mary immediately rushed to provide first aid to the injured person, but the bullet had pierced the liver, causing massive internal bleeding. There were no specialized medical facilities in the communal house, and ultimately, the person died despite efforts to save him. The officer was unaware of the disaster she had caused, and she finally reached the communal house, finding temporary safety with the help of the residents. However, the townspeople's attitude towards her was very cold, and could even be described as hatred. It wasn't until the sheriff and others arrived at the communal house that she learned she had killed a resident. To prevent the officer from shooting anyone else, Boyd confiscated her weapon. However, what they didn't know was that, in front of everyone, a strange event was unfolding. Elgin saw a red-dressed ghost, and he was not only terrified but also shocked, because a long time ago, he had seen this figure before, but it had only appeared in his dreams before. But this time, the figure appeared before him while he was awake. He mustered his courage to go take a look, and Elgin discovered that the figure meant him no harm. The perspective shifts back to Sheriff Boyd, as he endured the guilt until dawn. Boyd suddenly noticed someone lying in the car outside, and it was the abandoned David. After checking, he confirmed that David was still alive, but part of his face had been eaten by the monsters. This deepened Boyd's feelings of guilt, and he also realized that this was exactly what the monsters wanted to break him down from within. On the other side, after the events of last night, Victor was even more convinced that a crisis was imminent. He brought the suitcase to Sarah's house, seeking her help. They were both oddities in the town, so they were natural allies. Sarah hesitated slightly but then agreed. Thus, a long-buried history resurfaced. Long ago, Victor was still a child. The town had no protective talismans, and every night, everyone had to find a place to hide. Victor and his mother were no exception, and they had to hide every day. However, one day, due to unforeseen circumstances, many people were unable to find safety. The next day, when Victor emerged from hiding again, he found that the entire street was filled with corpses. Everyone had been killed that night. It was at this moment that Victor discovered the eerie boy in white, but like other apparitions, it vanished in the blink of an eye. After that, Victor began to bury the dead. At that time, he was just a child, having to evade the monsters every night, so it took a long time, and he couldn't bury everyone completely. In the end, Victor came up with a plan to collect items that best represented the dead, and then put them into a suitcase, finally burying it in the forest, as a tomb for the deceased. To this day, Victor felt that danger was once again looming, so he dug up the suitcase, and hoped to remember what exactly happened. That led to the massacre of everyone in one night. As the suitcase was opened, it was filled with all sorts of items, and Victor fell into deep thought. Sarah quietly observed beside him, not wanting to interrupt Victor's contemplation. Then suddenly, Victor realized something. Repeating the name of Chris's doll, Victor appeared a bit deranged, and Sarah asked who Chris was. Only then did Victor explain that among the townspeople back then, there was someone named Chris. He had a wooden doll. Chris often entertained everyone, until he discovered a mysterious symbol. And ever since then, Chris seemed like a completely different person. He not only huddled in a corner all day, but also hardly communicated with anyone. Victor even discovered multiple times that he was talking to the doll by himself, and sometimes he would argue with the doll. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing this news. Meanwhile, Jack contemplated for a long time, and decided to tell his companions, Kenny and others, about what he had seen before. After all, the timing of that guy's appearance was indeed too strange. After they removed the statue, that guy went from being nailed down to being able to move freely. Perhaps there was some connection between the two. As for what the truth actually was, they currently had no way of knowing. The perspective shifts to David, who finally regained consciousness from his coma. David discovered that he was still alive, and recalled the moment Boyd abandoned him. David was extremely angry, and the scars left on his face by the monsters only fueled his rage further. He had done so much for everyone, and now he was left with the outcome of being abandoned. Just then, Boyd came to visit him. David questioned Boyd, asking why he had abandoned him. Boyd helplessly explained the situation at that time, but David was clearly not satisfied. A rift had formed between the two. Seeing this situation, Boyd could only leave. He still had many issues to resolve. First was Basha, who had left the town and then returned. Since she had left this place, she must know information that others did not. The townspeople were filled with curiosity about this. After all, this might guide everyone on how to escape. To this end, Boyd decided to organize a town hall meeting, so that Basha could explain many things in front of everyone. Of course, this required persuading her to agree. In addition, food arrangements needed to be made. Kenny and others brought back many fresh vegetables from the forest cabin, but that would only last for a few days. Thus, how to distribute it became another major dilemma. However, what made him most nervous was still the mysterious man Jack had mentioned. His appearance was too coincidental and strange. Lastly, Boyd needed to accommodate the new survivors, and it was said that Victor's father was among them. He didn't know how to break the news to him. That afternoon, the town hall meeting was held in the dining hall. The townspeople arrived early, eager not to miss any news. Basha looked at the crowd packed inside, worried that she might disappoint them. Everyone asked Bessa various questions. Boyd gestured for everyone to be quiet, which finally brought the noise to a stop. Basha looked at their eager faces, but she could only tell the truth. She recounted how she fell from the tower, and then ended up in the hospital. Afterwards, guided by the priest, she found Victor's father, detailing everything to the townspeople. Almost none of it contained useful information, except for the part about the tree hollow that led to the tower. The residents were clearly dissatisfied with such answers, questioning why Basha had only cared about herself after going out, completely ignoring their lives. After all, she hadn't even asked the police for help, and it seemed she had no intention of saving them. In response, Basha explained that the situation here was too bizarre, and even if she told the police, they wouldn't believe her, and would likely take her for a lunatic. To this, Victor's father agreed. After all, he had come from the outside, and it took him a long time to accept this fact, but the townspeople didn't want to hear that, since they couldn't determine how to leave. Then the Tree Hollow portal became particularly important. Some townspeople expressed that they wanted to know the location of the Tree Hollow, planning to repeat Basha's previous actions. However, this proposal was rejected by Sheriff Boyd. He had passed through the Tree Hollow before, and knew it was a random teleportation. At that time, Boyd had been transported into a chimney, almost suffocating in the process. Yet this was the only escape clue the townspeople could find, and they simply couldn't give it up. Therefore, Boyd's words had no effect. Even his son Eric, with his wife Tima, took the lead in opposing Boyd's opinion, which pained him greatly. Ultimately, amidst all the noise, Basha quietly left the dining hall, and the town hall meeting had to come to an end. Basha returned home to complain to her husband Jim. Just then, an unexpected visitor arrived, and it was Jack. He had heard Basha's account during the town hall meeting, and he still decided to try. However, he didn't plan to act recklessly, but instead wanted to start with the details. Jack had heard that the tree was covered with bottles, and that many of them contained notes with numbers. Jack speculated that the secrets of the Tree Hollow's teleportation might be hidden in there, so he begged Basha to take him to the Tree Hollow. After some hesitation, Basha decided to take Jack with her. On the other hand, the townspeople also decided to head to the Tree Hollow, but they lacked Jack's caution. They acted recklessly. They entered the jungle based on what Basha had previously described, and they actually found a man. He saw that Basha and Jack were also there, and immediately concluded that the two had reached some sort of agreement to deceive the townspeople and occupy the escape route alone. Therefore, when faced with their persuasion, the man paid them no mind. He dove into the Tree Hollow without hesitation. Seeing this situation, the two could only sigh. Afterwards, Jack and Basha followed the plan, taking down the bottles hanging from the tree one by one, extracting the notes inside to record them, hoping to find clues. However, what they didn't know was that the town had already fallen into chaos. The man who had just entered the Tree Hollow had appeared in the wall of an abandoned swimming pool. Sheriff Boyd saw this scene and immediately understood what had happened. Boyd was angry at the man's refusal to listen to advice, but he still wanted to rescue him first. Unfortunately, it was too late. The man coughed up blood and died. To ensure that future generations would remember this, Donna suggested building a grave for the deceased man at the swimming pool. So, the group brought stones and left a stone grave there. Meanwhile, Victor and his father finally met. The two had not seen each other for decades, and now they were together. Although there were countless words in their hearts, in the end, it all turned into sighs exchanged between them. Victor had never imagined he would see his father again, although there was joy in his heart. But there was more worry, since his father had also come to the town. It was nearly impossible to escape now. Thinking of this, Victor's resolve grew stronger. He had to find that puppet, recalling the truth of what had happened back then, so that everyone could escape from this desperate town. Similar to Victor's feelings, after returning to his residence, Eric discovered by chance that his wife Tima was actually stealing rotten vegetables. Eric only then learned that, from over a week ago, Tima began to experience this situation. She was filled with worry. After all, in the small town, strange things are happening everywhere. Tima is worried about the baby in her womb. It's just a part of the many eerie ones, so she was very scared, urgently want to escape from here. This led Tima to refute Boyd's proposal. At the previous residence meeting, Eric could only comfort his wife and tell her not to worry too much, and he said he will always be with Tima. The screen returned to Victor's place again. After he recognized his father, Victor made up his mind to investigate the truth behind the events of that year. Therefore, he planned to go to that mysterious cave. In Victor's memories, the last time I saw Chris's puppet, it's in that cave. Just that when the residents explored before, they discovered many humanoid monsters inside. Now the cave had become a forbidden place, but even so, Victor felt he had to go there. When the old father heard his son's plan, he decided to accompany him. The two arrived outside the cave, and Victor repeatedly reminded his father not to make any noise. Then Victor led the way with a flashlight. The internal passages of the cave were complex, making it easy to get lost. Fortunately, Victor had prepared for this. He had brought many small figures, placing one on the ground at regular intervals to mark their path. However, the cave was deeper than Victor had imagined. Only the last little person remains, yet there was still quite a distance ahead. The only thing worth celebrating is that they had not encountered any humanoid monsters along the way. The two of them bravely moved forward. Eventually, they reached a spacious cavern, and Victor quickly spotted the puppet on a chair. He placed it into his backpack. Just as they were about to leave, the father accidentally discovered, not far away, there is actually his wife's scarf. He quickly stepped forward and took it away, but it awakened the sleeping humanoid monsters. Faced with the monsters closing in, the two could only flee quickly. Don't know how long it has been. They finally shook off the humanoid monsters. The two were able to take a brief rest. They were in an abandoned train car, where Victor had lived for a while. There are still daily necessities he left behind inside now. He pulled out the puppet and stared closely at it, hoping to recall some useful information. Meanwhile, Jack had already returned home. Looking at the numbers on a table, he pondered their connections. He had a guess in his mind. Perhaps Basha had gone through a wormhole or something like that in the beginning. And these numbers are the password to activate the specified direction. However, regarding his speculation, Boyd remained silent throughout. In such a bizarre town, Jack is seeking scientific connections, which seemed like a fool's errand. However, after carefully listening to the other party's account, Boyd revealed another piece of information. When he had entered the jungle earlier, he had encountered a tree filled with bottles in another direction. Upon hearing this news, Jack immediately pressed for more details. Boyd could not dissuade him, and he had no choice but to take Jack to the location of that tree. Although this tree is also filled with bottles, each bottle also contains a piece of paper with numbers written on it, but there is no tree hole that can be penetrated. Although Jack did not understand why there were these differences, but he still took all the notes inside, back to his residence first. During this time, strange things began to happen in the town again. Basha suddenly heard footsteps on the stairs at home, and she curiously went to check. To her surprise, a white ghostly figure appeared in her bedroom. Just as Basha was about to turn and run, she noticed another one on the other side. Basha huddled in the corner, and Ethan came to check after hearing his mother's voice, but there was no trace of the white ghostly figure at all. Basha was filled with confusion. She thought it might be related to her previous experiences outside the town. Basha took her son to find Jack, planning to tell him about this incident, hoping it might provide some clues. When Basha arrived, she found that there were even more notes in the house, although most of them are repetitive. But Ethan found that the rest of the parts were actually written in reverse order. Jack was still thinking the connection between the numbers of the two trees, but upon hearing Ethan's words, he suddenly had an epiphany. However, it was at this moment that Jack noticed the arrival of Basha and her son. Through their conversation, Jack learned about the white ghostly figures. He shared the same opinion as Basha, but Jack believed that the white figures seemed to have no malice. They appeared to be seeking help from Basha. Upon hearing this, Basha suddenly remembered. In the portrait of Victor's father's basement before, there is a portrait of a white little person, which were said to be asking for help from Victor's mother. Could it be that the previous incidents were similar? Just as Basha was pondering this, she accidentally noticed a strange painting in Jack's house. Bessa's expression immediately changed drastically. Jack immediately asked her what was wrong. This painting was from the area of the cabin that had just been discovered. Basha had not been in town during that time, and now, seeing her expression, it was clear she knew something. At this time, Basha accurately stated that there should be 3 red stones in that area. There were also some strange statues. Upon hearing this information, Jack's heart was even more horrified, because the 3 blood-red stones were actually discovered by him, and he had never mentioned them to anyone. How could Basha know about them? After some careful questioning, only then did I learn that when Bessa was very young, for a period of time she often had strange dreams. Inside are these blood-red stones and statues. It seemed as if everything had been predetermined. On the other side of the town, although Eric advised his wife Tima not to worry, but she keeps eating rotten vegetables, was clearly not a normal occurrence. Just recently, an ambulance that had recently entered the town had a set of ultrasound equipment, which could be used to observe the fetus, so he planned to have his wife checked. Can make both of them feel at ease. As they were going downstairs, accidentally met Elgin. The other party recently found a camera in an abandoned warehouse. Since then, this guy started taking pictures wherever he went. Since they had crossed paths, Elgin wouldn't miss the opportunity. He immediately took a photo of Tima and Eric. Eric and Tima didn't think much of it, but it is precisely this photo that brings a new strangeness. When Eric and Tima arrived at the clinic, they used the ultrasound equipment to examine Tima. However, the results were shocking. According to the display, there was no trace of a fetus in the image. Tima was not pregnant at all. Eric quickly reassured his wife, saying it might have all been an illusion, just like his father. Boyd, there was a period of time before. He always thinks there are bugs in his body, but Tima disagreed. While hallucinations were possible, her waistline had been getting bigger every day, so how could she explain that? On the other side, Elgin finally developed the photo, only to find a ghostly figure behind Tima. Elgin prepared to take a closer look, but the figure in the red dress appeared beside him again. The other party is still just in Elgin's ear, whispered a sentence.
Help me, Elgin. I can save you. I can save all of you.
And then she vanished. Just as Elgin was puzzled, his camera suddenly took a photo by itself. Elgin examined it closely. Then, recalling the words spoken by the female ghost earlier, he hurried outside, seemingly searching for something. Before long, he arrived at an empty space. There is a secret cellar here, Elgin knew. This is the place where the red-clothed female ghost guides herself to search. He bravely entered the cellar, found it unexpectedly narrow here, except for one cabinet. Only a few wooden barrels can be opened. Just as he was puzzled, a sudden knocking sound came from behind the cabinet. Clearly, this was the ghost guiding him. Elgin didn't hesitate, and immediately moved the cabinet aside. Sure enough, behind the cabinet was a uniquely styled area, indicating that someone had lived there before. Elgin went straight to the corner. He lifted the white cloth covering it, exposed the dried corpse covered below. Just then, the ghost in red appeared quietly again, her staring intently at the corpse, seemingly deep in thought. The scene shifted to the area of the small cabins in the forest, where everyone was busy picking vegetables. Suddenly, Jack actually brought the Basha couple here. It turned out that Basha, after hearing Jack's account, have to come and confirm with my own eyes. Although her husband, Jim, was a bit worried, however, Basha's mind has been made up, so Jim had no choice but to accompany her. The scenery here, since Basha was a child, she has been constantly appearing in her dreams. It must have some meaning. She approached the red giant stone, and a wave of memories suddenly surged. Basha recalled. In the initial dream, she was always hiding and running, but every time she was about to see the pursuer's face, she would wake up involuntarily. Recalling these contents, Basha was even more convinced that behind the dreams, there must be some important clues hidden, but how to uncover them? She has no way yet. Just as Basha and her husband were leaving, their daughter, Julie, went out to play alone. She happened to run into David, who had just been discharged. As peers in the town, the two naturally have a lot in common. They quickly brought it up. Julie wants to learn how to drive herself. David is about to demonstrate this immediately. He took Julie to a van, which was used by the residents for emergencies, usually just parked here. David got in the car with Julie, and he carefully explained the driving details to her. In Julie's admiring gaze, David became a bit carried away, and he actually drove the van away. He even showed off his driving skills on the road, but the good times didn't last long. David hasn't had a chance to be happy yet. He suddenly fell into a hallucination again. Many bees appear in the cab, and the vehicle was speeding at that moment. The consequences of losing control. would be unimaginable. Fortunately, David was very rational. Although one hand keeps tapping the insects, he was also gradually slowing the vehicle down. When the car comes to a steady stop, David suddenly bolted out of the cabin. He attempted to get rid of those bees. Julie noticed David's strange behavior, and she couldn't help but feel puzzled. Fortunately, after he jumped out of the car, he returned to normal. Julie felt a sense of unease inside her. She was ready to ask David to go back quickly. However, due to what had just happened, David felt he had lost face. He couldn't face Julie. David suddenly dashed into the jungle. Seeing this, Julie immediately chased after him. They ran for an unknown amount of time, until they arrived at a deserted ancient building complex. David regained his composure again. He realizing that there was likely danger ahead, David was about to pull Julie back immediately. However, Julie on the side thought so. She can feel it. Those ancient architectural complexes seemed to be calling out to themselves. Although David eventually pulled Julie away, she had already memorized the place in her mind. However, what Julie doesn't know is that, previously, everyone in the small town, including herself, when trapped in a dream of death, it was Boyd who found this ancient building complex, and destroyed the music boxes placed there. Only then did everyone regain their senses. Meanwhile, Victor was still studying the puppet. After he returned from deep within the cave, he spent all day staring at the puppet, and Victor's father watched everything closely. He is very concerned about his son's condition. As time passed, both father and son began to feel anxious. No matter how hard Victor tried, he namely can't recall any relevant information, yet destruction was continuously closing in. Victor suddenly remembered in his anxiety. He recalled it at Sarah's house before. Perhaps returning there again, it can have some effect. That's it. Victor took the puppet to Sarah's house. In the puzzled gaze of the other party, he requested to borrow the basement. This was Victor's last hope. Besides, the others in the town were also trying their best. After living in the small town for a few days, the female police officer, she can't stand the atmosphere here. Not only is everyone strange, even the basic planning is very chaotic. She approached Deputy Sheriff Kenny. The female police officer hopes that the other party can help her retrieve the gun. She planned to search for solutions on her own. Kenny had seen too many people like this. He calmly advised the other party not to risk their lives. The strangeness of the town was not something one person could solve. As if to prove Kenny right, the speaker that was originally destroyed by him suddenly began to play music. The female officer stared at the speaker, which had no wires, and she was stunned on the spot. This was just the most trivial part of the despairing town, but the more dangerous the environment became, the more unwilling the female police officer is to surrender. Since Kenny was unwilling to help, the officer decided to take matters into her own hands. She sneaked into Boyd's office to search for her weapon. Unfortunately, Boyd returned just in time to catch the scene. Seeing this situation, the female officer didn't bother to argue much, and firmly demanded that he return her service weapon. She was a police officer, with the legal right to carry a gun. Boyd, however, didn't care about that. He stated it was impossible. After all, when the officer had the gun before, she knew that shooting the humanoid monsters was useless, and kept shooting wildly, resulting in the death of a town resident. If he were to give her the gun back, who knows how many more residents would suffer. The two were momentarily at a stalemate. The female officer mocked Boyd, calling him a coward. He had weapons, but only dared to hide in the town, and she said she was looking for a way to escape, and needed a handgun to assist her. Upon hearing this, Boyd hesitated. He had never given up on finding a way to escape, but he had to admit that, after going through so much, Boyd has indeed become weak. He no longer has the same drive as before. After a long period of hesitation, he ultimately decided to return the handgun to the officer. However, to ensure safety, Boyd removed all the bullets from it, leaving only an empty shell. He then told the officer that he would return it to her when the time was right. Although the female officer felt dissatisfaction, she could only accept it for the time being. However, one wave did not calm down, and another rose again. Not long after Boyd left the office, he saw his son rushing into the clinic. Boyd hurried over to check and discovered that Eric was actually planning to steal medication. Boyd stepped forward to stop him, asking him what had happened. Only then did he learn that Eric's wife, Tima, had not been found to be pregnant after the tests, and now she was continuously eating various rotten vegetables. Eric believed Tima was experiencing mental issues, so he came to the clinic to get medication for mental illness. However, Dr. Christie stated that Tima's current condition was not suitable for those medications. Using them forcefully would only worsen her symptoms. With the joint persuasion of his father and the doctor, Eric can only put down the medication. He was saddened by his inability to save his wife, but Eric did not know that. During his absence, Tima showed abnormal symptoms again. Her abdomen began to wriggle strangely, and Tima's desire to eat rotten vegetables is becoming increasingly strong, although reason keeps stopping Tima. However, desire is even stronger. Just then, the old woman with white hair happened to pass by. She seeing Tima's strange behavior, she quickly stepped forward to show concern. However, at that moment, Tima seemed possessed, and she grabbed a nearby tool, killing the old woman on the spot. Worse still, Eric happened to return at that very moment. He witnessed with his own eyes the scene of his wife killing someone. He felt extremely panicked inside, and hurried to seek help from his father, Boyd. Eric hoped to find a way to save his wife. Out of love for his son, Boyd agreed to help. Before the residents of the small town discovered it, he took Tima out of the town, hiding her in a small cabin somewhere. Boyd left a protective totem, so she could live here safely for a time. According to Boyd's plan, after handling the matter of the white-haired old woman, Boyd will bring Tima back to live in the town. However, plans could not keep up with changes. Haven't waited for him to return to the small town yet. The townspeople discovered the murdered old woman. The crowd was filled with panic, because Boyd had not returned yet. The one responsible for handling this matter was the new female officer. She briefly examined the wounds, and concluded that it was not the work of a humanoid monster. This news made the townspeople even more anxious, and Elgin after hearing it. Elgin had almost no reaction. He was merely a bit curious, but just then, the magical camera he picked up suddenly took another photo by itself. Elgin quickly picked up the photo to examine it, and the next moment, Elgin went to the small town clinic. He took advantage of the moment when no one was paying attention. Elgin took out blood drawing tool, and drew his blood into a glass vial. The reason Elgin did this, was that the photo he had just seen showed a blood bag. Clearly, Elgin, in order to escape the town, he has been deceived by the red-clothed female ghost. He will execute whatever the other party says. On the other side, Boyd finally returned to the town. He was originally discussing with his son Eric. Before facing the crowd's arguments, Boyd saw that the crime scene was already surrounded by people. Although the townspeople were still unsure of the killer's identity, they had formed some suspicions. That is, Sarah, who had a criminal record, although she had been manipulated before. This did not change the fact that Sarah had killed before, and Donna from the public housing department also agrees with this viewpoint. If no results were found in the investigation, Sarah could very likely be wrongfully accused of being the murderer. She would be locked in a cage once again. This left Eric in a state of hesitation. Meanwhile, Sarah was unaware that she had become a murderer. During this time, she has been in her own basement all this time, helping Victor recall past events. But so far, there had been no results, which made Victor feel extremely anxious. He kept tugging at his own hair. Seeing Victor in this state, Sarah was very worried. Therefore, Sarah went to Basha's house, hoping to get her help. Just at that moment, Basha and the others returned from the forest. They had found nothing. After all, there were too many strange occurrences in the town. Basha dreams are nothing at all, even from the beginning. Husband Jim, there is no expectation of gaining anything. Now, seeing his wife a bit down, he simply reassured her to relax. While they were talking, they encountered Sarah, who was seeking help. Basha immediately went to Sarah's house. Victor became excited upon seeing Basha. Basha and he have experienced that cave together. With her here, the probability of her recalling memories was much higher. Although Basha didn't understand, but she complied with the request, and began to recount her experiences from that day. With Basha's cooperation, Victor recalled more memories. At a certain moment, he completely recalled everything. He had seen Chris in the church at that time, and Chris was not talking to the puppet. It's the boy in white. As for the content they discussed at that time, Victor also recalled everything. The boy in white said that everything now originated from those strange children. Once, they had all been loved by their parents, but one day, all the children were killed by their parents. Only one child escaped the fate of being harmed by his parents. That was the boy in white. From that point on, this desperate town appeared. But those children were not the masterminds. They were merely trapped there, and the mysterious tree hole was the only way to rescue them. Victor remembered it very clearly. At that time, Chris didn't care about this, but he believed it wholeheartedly. He even told his mother about these things. It was from that point on my mother disappeared without a trace. In this way, many things have explanations, but there was still a long way to go to solve the many mysteries of the town. During the period when Bessa and others went to find Victor, Julie began to feel restless. She couldn't forget that abandoned building complex. Now it happens that Jim and the others are not here. She no longer has any constraints. Julie planned to return there to take a look again. At first, she wanted to invite David. After all, he was familiar with it too. However, David felt that the place was eerie, so he refused Julie's invitation. Seeing this situation, she wants to find her younger brother Ethan. The other party is young and ignorant, and he was easily persuaded by Julie. The two of them arrived at the abandoned building complex. At first glance here, Ethan also sensed something strange. However, Julie stated that, since the previous death dream incident, a voice kept screaming in my mind, but not long ago, she had unexpectedly arrived here. That sound actually disappeared. Julie believed this was destined fate, guiding her to explore what was inside. Hearing her sister's words, Ethan encouraged his sister as well. Julie mustered her courage and walked into the abandoned building complex. But in the next moment, the scene around her changed entirely. Not only did the screaming in her mind return, and there is also a trend of intensifying. Julie covered her ears in pain. She didn't know how long this feeling lasted. When Julie regained her senses, she found that Ethan was nowhere to be seen. The surroundings seemed like a cave. And what frightened Julie the most was that on the wall not far away, there was a strangely shaped person tied up. He was gaunt and skeletal, looking unlike a living person, yet he could still converse with Julie. Julie hasn't had the chance to learn more yet. She heard that strange person suddenly give a command. He told her that someone in the well needed a rope. Only then did Julie notice that there was a vertical well not far away. She hurriedly threw down the rope beside her. And this is in the second season, when Boyd was trapped. The reason for the sudden appearance of the rope. Julie has finished these. She was ready to continue talking to the strange man. The other party appeared very impatient, urging Julie to escape quickly. Although she didn't understand what was happening, she did as she was told. Julie left through the only stone door, and the surroundings changed once again. Arrived at that terrifying cave, not far away, she heard the voices of Victor and his mother, Basha. This was clearly something that had happened in the past. Julie still didn't understand why this was happening. Screams echoed in my ears once again. She was in great pain because of this. But when Julie regained consciousness, she found herself back in the forest. The deputy sheriff Kenny and the female officer were nearby, and she didn't understand what had happened. Only found out through Ethan's narration that after Julie entered the abandoned building complex, she collapsed on the ground and began to convulse. Seeing that things were bad, he immediately went back to seek help. On the way, he happened to meet Kenny and the others. They have no way to deal with Julie's symptoms either, so they could only take her back first. However, strangely, just as Julie was taken out of the abandoned building area, she woke up. This is really too eerie in between, so that they don't know how to handle it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Tima, who was hiding in the cabin, after days of contemplation, decided to bravely take responsibility for her actions. But her husband Eric disagreed with her decision. After Eric left, Tima saw the ghost in red in a daze. But in the next moment, it vanished again. Soon after, Elgin came over. At this time, Tima was unaware that he had completely fallen under the ghost's control. Elgin is just a few words. He lured Tima to the secret cellar. When she realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Elgin controlled Tima, dragging her deep into the cellar. On the other side, husband Eric was on his way back. Thinking for a long time about what his wife had said, Eric decided to confess to the townspeople, and planned to take his wife. From then on, lived in the forest, never caused trouble for residents. Boyd couldn't bear it in his heart. He wants to protect his son's family, just like Sarah in the past. But Donna's words were like a bucket of cold water that extinguished his resolve.
Because they don't believe in you anymore.
Although Boyd was reluctant to admit it, he had to accept this fact, so Eric could only pack his things, preparing to live in the cabin with his wife forever. But when Eric returned, he found that his wife was missing. He and his father, Boyd, searched everywhere, but they found nothing. During this time, Boyd's body is also experiencing some issues. He began to shake. Eric, in order to take care of his father, he could only temporarily stop searching. Boyd, seeing that the situation could no longer be hidden, he had no choice but to explain to his son. He had been diagnosed with ALS. Now legs are a bit out of control, and perhaps soon, he would be completely paralyzed and unable to move. Eric received one bad news after another, and he was deeply affected. But all Eric could do was to spend more time with his father. Unknowingly, the sky was shrouded in darkness. Monsters began to roam the town once again. Eric couldn't help but worry about the missing Tima. However, in reality, she was very safe at that moment. After Elgin controlled Tima, he didn't make it difficult for her. Elgin took out the prepared blood bag, and he saw the puzzled look in Tima's eyes. Elgin began to explain the reasons behind his actions. He stated that the fetus needed to eat more to grow faster. Only then can they all leave. Although Tima didn't understand what exactly is Elgin saying, but she did have a strong craving for blood deep inside. She grabbed the bottle and drank it in one gulp. As the sun rose, Eric set out again to search for his wife. Boyd planned to use his position as sheriff, mobilize the residents of the small town to go out and search together. While they were still discussing, Sarah suddenly burst in. The two of them still haven't understood what happened. Sarah stated that she came for Tima and asked if she has gone missing. This made Boyd and the others look a bit strange. After all, this matter, they never mentioned it to anyone else. Sarah told the two of them about this. When she was in the basement before, she suddenly felt a splitting headache, and a strange voice appeared in her mind. It was that voice that told her Tima was missing. The voice also indicated that Tima's disappearance was a deliberate act by someone behind the scenes, aimed at causing panic among the townspeople. Boyd and Eric's expressions grew more serious, and considering the previous situation, Boyd deduced that this was likely a plot by the monsters. Therefore, he prepared to gather all the townspeople to discuss how to handle the matter together. But before that, he needed to discuss with Donna first. When he arrived at the communal house, they saw Victor holding an axe. This guy is planning to cut down that tree hole in Big Tree. The reason Victor made this decision was entirely because not long ago, he recalled that mother because of what he said, "Enter the tree hole to view," and it disappeared completely from then on. Victor needs to fundamentally eliminate the evil that took away my mother. Of course, the sheriff was not aware of this matter. He is busy discussing with Donna how to handle the disappearance of Tima. Although she did kill someone, it was likely a conspiracy of monsters. They must retrieve Tima before the other party's plan succeeds. Donna hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Boyd rings the bell. He convened a meeting for all the residents of the small town. The location is still the tea restaurant. However, because Kenny's mother had been murdered previously, the tea restaurant was now run by someone else. As all the townspeople arrived, Boyd recounted the details of Tima's disappearance. He planned to form a search team to quickly dismantle the monster's scheme. During this time, some people asked about the death of the white-haired old woman, but Boyd just brushed it off, and it states that the priority was to find Tima and thwart the conspiracy. The crowd found this reasonable, and they eagerly signed up for the search. However, after everyone left, Boyd left Kenny alone. He invited the other party and himself into the dense forest. During this time, Boyd told Kenny everything about his situation and informed him that
I need to know that you are going to step up and look after this place.
Kenny nodded and accepted this heavy responsibility. Meanwhile, the imprisoned Tima was constantly thinking about how to escape. However, her belly was growing larger. Action has also become inconvenient. In addition, previously, she had tried to ambush Elgin with a metal shard to escape, but the plan had failed. Tima's hope of escape seemed even more remote. Just when she didn't know what to do, Tima accidentally discovered that beneath the cellar, there was a hidden entrance, but it couldn't be opened at the moment. Tima hasn't had a chance to take action yet. The ghost in red appeared again. She made a shushing gesture. It turned out that Basha has already found this area, but Tima was unaware of the situation, so she followed the ghost's instructions and kept quiet. The reason Basha was able to come here, it's all because she has the guidance of those ghostly children. Since Basha learned from Victor about the past of those children, and combined with her previous experiences, Basha was convinced that those ghostly children meant her no harm. Therefore, during her search, she saw a ghostly figure from a distance, and took the initiative to follow behind. This led her to the vicinity of the cellar. However, the guidance of the ghostly children was clearly not towards the cellar. Soon, Basha was led by the other party to the location of the teleportation tree hole. At this moment, Victor was chopping with an axe, and Basha hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. However, at the moment she touched Victor, countless memories suddenly flooded her mind. This situation, in the basement of Sarah's house before, Basha has already appeared once. Among these memories, Basha noticed that there had once been a girl next to Victor. The relationship between the two and Victor's mother looks very intimate, but Basha didn't understand why she was seeing these. Could it be that she was once a part of the town? On the side of imprisoned Tima, she has been drinking fresh blood continuously these days. The abdomen has become increasingly swollen, although she didn't know what was inside her. But it's clearly not a good thing, because that thing seems to be about to burst out at any moment. At that moment, Tima suppressed her urge to eat, and she slammed half a bottle of blood against the wall. However, in this way, this did not solve the problem of the monster inside her. Tima hesitated for a long time, picked up the broken glass. She is preparing to commit suicide and take away the monster in her belly. But just then, the ghost in red appeared before her. Before Tima could react, she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. The ghost in red stated that Tima was about to give birth. As if to confirm her words, Tima felt the pain in her abdomen becoming more intense. It seemed as though something was about to come out of her. Meanwhile, the townspeople had been searching for days, but still had no trace of Tima. Eric couldn't help but feel frustrated. At this moment, Elgin, who was in his group, told Eric that Tima was in a very safe place. These words made Eric suspicious, and he carefully recalled Elgin's reactions during this time. The more Eric thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. Perhaps Elgin knew something, but Eric didn't speak up. Instead, he went to find his father, Boyd. He informed Boyd of his findings. Then the other party stepped forward and had a good talk with Elgin as the sheriff. After hearing his son's account, Boyd, he also thinks hiding something. So, Boyd invited Sarah to be a witness, and they went to confront Elgin for questioning. When they arrived at the communal house, coincidentally, met Elgin, who was going out. He was carrying a package on his back. Boyd requested to inspect the items inside. To their surprise, it was full of various daily necessities. With a little thought, one can understand that must be delivering supplies to people outside the town. And now, outside, besides the humanoid monsters, there was only the missing Tima. Boyd took control of Elgin, and he asked him why he was hiding Tima. Seeing that his plot had been exposed, he admitted it, but he claimed that everything he did was all for the purpose of getting the townspeople to leave. Boyd listened to Elgin explain the whole story. He instantly deduced this guy was influenced by those strange temptations. In response, Sarah agreed with his viewpoint, because Elgin's current state was similar to hers back then. There are voices telling themselves, as long as you do it, can make the residents of the small town leave. However, in the end, not only did he not leave, he also caused the death of his own brother. Yet Elgin remained stubbornly oblivious, believing that he was saving the townspeople. He insisted that the ghost hadn't made him harm anyone. She was just hiding Tima, waiting for the baby in her womb to be born. After ultrasonic testing, Eric was very clear that there's nothing in Tima's belly at all. If there really was something, that must also be strange. Seeing Elgin still so self-righteous, Eric was extremely angry. If it weren't for everyone's intervention, I'm afraid Elgin will get beaten up. However, up to now, they had to find out Tima's whereabouts from Elgin. Sarah believed that he had been completely bewitched. Ordinary methods simply cannot awaken him. Boyd was very angry, and he immediately stated that he would find a way. He rushed into the tool shed, and it was clear that Boyd intended to use these small tools to perform a memory restoration technique. Although it was somewhat inhumane, there was no time to worry about that now. While he was selecting tools, Boyd suddenly saw a flicker of a vision. It was the ghost of the deceased priest. The other party asked Boyd why he did this. He had previously committed actions similar to Elgin's. Even knowing that Tima might have been manipulated when he killed, he still thought about protecting her. Yet now he was going to take vigilante justice against someone similarly manipulated. Boyd remained silent, knowing this was merely the strangeness of the town. He didn't need to explain anything to the ghost. Soon after, Boyd returned with the selected tools and stood before Elgin. He laid out the items one by one, clearly intending to intimidate Elgin, hoping to make him wake up quickly to avoid suffering. But Elgin remained utterly unresponsive. In that case, Boyd could only tie him up and prepare for execution. At this moment, a sudden flash of light appeared nearby. It turned out to be that old camera. The ghost in red was transmitting a message to them again. The photo turned out to be his residence outside with his wife. The ghost issued a threat, and Boyd became even more certain that the ghost had ill intentions towards them. After questioning Elgin again with no results, Boyd no longer hesitated. Elgin's screams echoed throughout the communal house. The female officer and others rushed in to see what was happening. They discovered that Boyd was actually abusing his power. The female officer was relentless about it, stating that she would expose his true nature. In front of everyone, Boyd quickly defended himself, arguing that if this information got out, his reputation would be completely ruined. Even if he managed to save Tima, it would be hard to protect her. The two of them kept arguing like this, completely unaware of Sarah in the corner, frowning deeply. She having experienced those strange manipulations, Sarah understood Elgin's current situation. He would never yield to ordinary methods. So, she took advantage of Boyd's defense. Sarah slipped into the room where Elgin was held. She picked up the screwdriver from the table. Sarah began to torture Elgin severely. The screams echoed throughout the communal house again. When Boyd and the others arrived, Elgin was already on the brink of death, because after the previous operation, she had actually obtained Tima's location. Boyd and the others rushed directly to the cellar, and they finally found the missing Tima. At that moment, her lower body was covered in blood, but fortunately, she was not in mortal danger. Through questioning, Boyd learned that, just now, under the guardianship of the female ghost, Tima actually gave birth. However, it was not a normal baby, but a mass of flesh. The female ghost left the tunnel with that thing. Upon hearing this, Boyd felt that something was wrong. He rushed into the tunnel, intending to investigate further, to find out what the ghost in red was planning. However, as Boyd went deeper into the tunnel, he became increasingly anxious, not just because the tunnel was deep, but also because it seemed to lead subtly to the monster cave outside the town. After an unknown amount of time, Boyd finally arrived at a familiar place. It's the open area of that cave. At this point, he stopped in his tracks, because there were already many humanoid monsters standing nearby, and the ghost in red he was looking for was among them. However, the arrangement of those monsters was very strange, as if they were holding some kind of ritual. In the next moment, Boyd witnessed a horrifying scene. When Boyd saw the other person's face, he was even more horrified inside, because it was the monster he had killed before. He didn't expect it to be reborn in this manner. Meanwhile, Tima, in the cellar, told her husband Eric that during this time, she finally learned the identity of the monsters. Those things were all original residents of the small town, but in their pursuit of immortality, they used an evil ritual, sacrifice beloved child. This has become what it looks like today. On the other side, Basha, after coming into contact with Victor, she experienced numerous memories. Basha had a vague guess. She thinks this may be Victor's mother, transmitting some kind of information to oneself, but there is too little information now. She is still unable to know the exact content. Basha suddenly thought that Jack was studying the anomalies of the town, and he might be able to provide assistance. However, faced with his wife's decision, her husband Jim felt deeply concerned, stating that he would go with her. Soon after, they found Jack. Basha told him about her experiences, and Jack's expression instantly became excited. Only then did Basha learn, have seen a lot of content before. Jack has also seen it before, and he also saw the mysterious pattern composed of tree roots. Based on Basha account, Jack immediately understood that the tree roots and the teleportation tree hole were interconnected, so those bottles hanging on the tree, it is even less likely to be done casually. The note inside must have some kind of profound meaning. Jack checked the information on the note again. Jim, after seeing those numbers, he suddenly mentioned that he had made a discovery. Originally, these notes had a total of 10 sets of numbers, but there are several groups where 2 and 7 are upside down. In the end, there were a total of 12 groups. Jim suddenly remembered, there is a special scale that consists of 12 notes. With this reminder, Jack's gaze towards those numbers has changed. The once mysterious numbers, in that moment, transformed into harmonious tones. Jack was about to play this melody on the spot, but he was stopped by Jim. They are not aware that after the performance, what exactly will happen. To ensure safety, the group decided to conduct the experiment at the tree hole. They arrived at the designated location, confirming that there were no others around. At this point, Jack finally began to play the melody, as he pulled the violin in his hand. Sure enough, the group of ghostly dolls appeared one after another. However, they quickly discovered that only Basha and Jack could see them. Jim remained utterly confused and helpless. In the next moment, Basha seemed to be stimulated by something. She repeatedly murmuring, "I understand now." Jim noticed his wife's unusual behavior. he quickly stepped forward to show concern, only to find out that, the moment I saw the ghostly child just now, many memories had flooded into her mind. At this moment, Basha finally understood that she was actually the reincarnation of Victor's mother. When he came into contact with these ghostly children, and Jack also realized that he was actually Chris's reincarnation, he is also the owner of that puppet. They were reborn time and again, just to liberate these children. However, it was clear that they had not succeeded so far. Thinking of this, Basha felt an overwhelming sense of loss. She went to a corner to calm herself down. Jim, seeing this, felt it was inappropriate to disturb her too much, and he decided to leave alone for the time being. However, Jim walked halfway. He suddenly saw his daughter running towards him, her face covered in blood. She was mumbling some strange words. Of course, he would have no way of knowing. At this moment, in the distance, David has another Julie there. Before Jim could understand what was happening, a man in yellow suddenly appeared. Before Jim could react, he was already grabbed by the throat. The man whispered softly, "Basha shouldn't have dug into that basement." Then he cruelly killed Jim. Who exactly was this man in yellow? Why did Julie appear in the jungle? And also saying those strange things? All kinds of mysteries can only wait for the next season. The film ends here. That concludes the content of Season 3 of Nightmare Town. Although in this season, the writers filled in some of the plot holes left by the previous 2 seasons, but at the same time, more pits were dug. Crazy development of branch lines. It seems that the plan is to make every small town resident. Everyone can have their own story to unfold. The idea is good, but don't know how to bring all these plots together into one truth. In addition, the mysterious man in yellow who appeared at the end, and the existence of the 2 Julys, also left people full of curiosity. It's unknown what roles they will play in the future plot. If you enjoy my channel, please click to subscribe.